Welcome to The Explainer. So, long before Rome was even a thought, the Italian peninsula was this chaotic, contested place. Today, we're going to dive into how a massive struggle for control of the sea really set the stage for one of history's greatest powers.
I just love this quote because it paints such a perfect picture, right? Think of early Italy as being in this kind of dim twilight, just waiting for the lights to come on. And those lights, well, they were coming from powerful civilizations sailing in from the east.
So, how did Italy actually wake up? Well, the big change didn't come from the north, over the mountains. No, it came from the sea, the Mediterranean. That was the real highway for new ideas, new people, and yeah, a lot of new conflict.
Now, sure, you had some ancient trade routes for things like amber crossing the Alps from the north, but honestly, that was just a trickle. The real cultural tidal wave, the force that would genuinely shape the future of the Italian peoples, came from the great seafaring nations of the East. Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting. You've got two major powers sailing to Italy, but they're playing two totally different games. On one side, you have the Phoenicians. They were basically just setting up shop, right? Small trading posts along the coast. But then you had the Greeks. Oh, they weren't just visiting. They were moving in, building whole cities, and literally changing the face of the peninsula forever. So here's the thing you've got to remember. It was the Hellenes who truly cracked Italy wide open. They showed up and wave after wave of settlers, building new cities and bringing their entire culture with them. They ended up reshaping the whole southern part of the peninsula into what became known as Magna Graecia, or Great Greece. But this wasn't some overnight invasion. It was more like a slow discovery. You know, back in the age of Homer's poems, Italy was just a land of myths and monsters, this fuzzy, unknown place on the edge of the map. A little later, the outlines get clear, but they still thought it was a bunch of islands. And then, bam, Cumae is founded, a real, permanent foothold. And after that, the floodgates just open. And you can see here, not all Greek colonists were cut from the same cloth. You had the Achaeans, who were mostly farmers. They settled inland, and, well, they got a little too comfortable, a little complacent. But then you had the Ionodorians. These guys were all about trade. They built the big, bustling port cities that really became the engines of cultural exchange. And what you ended up with was this incredible melting pot of different Hellenic peoples all jammed into southern Italy. You've got Achaeans, Ionians, Dorians, and others, all competing and living together. That diversity is exactly what gave Magna Graecia its super vibrant and, let's be honest, often really volatile character. But here's the thing. The native Italians, they weren't just standing around watching all this happen. Not at all. They were learning, they were adapting, and they were getting ready to fight for their home. And this is where the story really takes a turn. So what do you do, right, when a more advanced civilization just shows up on your doorstep? Do you roll out the welcome mat, or do you fight back? For the native Italians, the answer was, well, both. The real answer came roaring out of the north, with the rise of a people the Greeks would absolutely come to fear, the Tyrrhenians. That was the Greek name for the Etruscans, and pretty soon their fast-sailing ships made that name a synonym for terror on the high seas. And just like the Greeks, the Italians weren't all on the same page. You see two totally different playbooks emerge in central Italy. The city of Caere, they chose cooperation. It became this kind of international free-for-all port, getting super rich by letting both Greek and Phoenician traders do their thing. But the heartland of Etruria, they chose confrontation. They built a powerful navy, kicked out Greek settlers, and challenged them for total mastery of the sea. See, the Etruscans didn't just push back. They learned from their rivals and built a massive maritime empire of their own. Their whole power structure was built on these four pillars: a seriously scary navy, total control of Italy's rich metals like iron and copper, strategic dominance of the sea right off their coast, and a whole network of alliances with other Italian tribes who supplied them with critical stuff, like timber for their ships. So let's zoom out a bit, because this local squabble between the Greeks and the Italians, it was actually just one small part of a much, much bigger struggle. We're talking about a fight for the future of the entire Mediterranean. For centuries, you had these two massive seafaring peoples just going at it for supremacy. It was the great game of the ancient world, the sprawling rivalry for control of every trade route and every valuable coastline, from Spain all the way to the Levant. In Italy,
It had just become a key battleground. The turning point really came when the younger, more aggressive Greek power just pushed a little too far, and that forced the older Phoenician power, now led by the city of Carthage, to organize a serious resistance. Seeing a common enemy, Carthage formed this strategic alliance of convenience with the Etruscans. It was basically the old powers ganging up on the new kid on the block. And this new alliance? It was about to be put to the test in the waters off of Corsica, in one of the very first great naval battles in recorded history, the Battle of Alayla. The fate of the entire Western Sea was hanging in the balance. I mean, just look at these numbers. The Greeks were incredible sailors, no doubt, but they were basically sailing straight into a trap. 60 of their ships against a combined fleet of 120. They were outnumbered 2-1. The odds were just not good. And in one single, absolutely brutal battle, the course of history was changed. The Greeks technically claimed a victory, but it was what they called a Cadmean victory, meaning their losses were so devastating they were forced to just abandon their colony on Corsica. The unstoppable momentum of Greek expansion to the west was finally broken. So the result of this huge struggle wasn't a total win for one side. Instead, you get this new, tense balance of power. It was a stalemate that basically carved up the Western Mediterranean into these very distinct zones of control. Here's the new map of power, basically. The Greeks were now pretty much stuck in the south. The Etruscans took the center, and Carthage dominated the west. The Mediterranean was now in this three-way standoff, and that created a power vacuum that was about to change everything. And the stalemate at sea, it created a really fascinating power vacuum on the Italian mainland itself. With all the great maritime empires basically holding each other in check, the stage was set for a totally unexpected land-based power to rise up out of obscurity, conquer all of them, and ultimately unite the entire peninsula. The only question was, who could it be?